What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Luke Walton's brief tenure with the Sacramento Kings. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials in the description as well, and let's go ahead and get started. So it's hard to say that Luke Walton, in his 2 and change years with Sacramento, it's hard to say that he ruined the Kings and that they were a disaster under him, because that's kind of just been the case with them for forever. They do a pretty good job of ruining things by themselves, whether it be with dysfunction, bad drafting, bad free agency signings, bad coaching decisions. They've pretty much been a disaster of a franchise for well over a decade now. They haven't made the playoffs since 2006. That is now 11 head coaches ago. They have less than 30 wins in 8 of those seasons since 2006. And now they're sitting at 6-11. They fired another coach, and they're arguably the worst franchise in the league. It's between either them or Minnesota, but Minnesota does have that one playoff appearance with Jimmy Butler and things like that. So it's probably Sacramento if you're talking about legitimately the worst franchise in the NBA. But what I want to do is look back briefly at the tenure of Luke Walton, the 2 and change years that he spent with the team, and just a lot of the mistakes that he made, that the team made over that time period, and just, again, to showcase how bad of a franchise this really truly is. So first I want to ask you guys, like, when was the last time that you remember Sacramento being a really exciting, like, relevant NBA team, a team that people were talking about, a team that was interesting, a team that was at least fun to watch or exciting? For a lot of you, if you were old enough to watch the NBA back then, you're probably thinking about, the early 2000s Kings with, Chris Webber and things like that. But they've actually been relevant and interesting and exciting way, way more recently than that. If you go back and look at the 2018-19 NBA season, the Kings were fun. They got off to a pretty good start. They were above 500 at 33-32 all the way into March in that season. I didn't even look. I can't remember the last time Sacramento was above 500 in March. It's probably 2006. They had rookie Marvin Bagley back then. De'Aaron Fox was shooting 37% from 3. Buddy Hield was averaging 20+. Bogey was hitting game winners for him. They had Nemanja Bjelica. They had Willie Cauley-Stein. It was an interesting young team, and they were fun. Like, I actually remember watching a lot of Kings basketball that year because they were an interesting and an entertaining team. De'Aaron Fox, that's probably the best that he's looked for an entire season in his career to this point. They played at a really fast pace. They got up and down the floor. And I think the biggest part of that for them was that they had an identity. They knew who they were. They knew they weren't going to be a fantastic defensive team, but they were going to use their youth, their athleticism, their quickness to play the game at a fast pace. And a lot of times during the regular season, if you're a young team and you can keep up that energy level, that can steal you a lot of wins against more veteran teams that are just not trying to run up and down the floor with you. And that was the last time that Sacramento really had an identity as a team. Now, that was under former head coach Dave Joerger, who I'm not going to pretend was a basketball genius or anything, but that is the best season that the Kings have had in like 15 years from a win standpoint, in terms of them being relevant to the playoff race, in terms of them being interesting and exciting. And yeah, they missed the playoffs by 9 games ultimately, but only because the West that year, every single playoff team in the West won 48 games. The Clippers were the 8th seed that year at 48-34. So it's not like they had a bad season. It's actually almost makes it even more impressive that they won 38, 39 games, considering how strong the rest of the conference was. Now, you're probably thinking, well, they finally had a good season. 39 whatever wins, that's really good for Sacramento. It's a step in the right direction. I bet they really just stuck with that coach. They made sure there was consistency in the organization, and they just continued to run it back with that same group of players, maybe adding small additions, but letting those guys just kind of grow and develop as a young team. No, they fired Joerger after that season to bring in Luke Walton, who has now been fired a little bit over 2 years later. Now, the mindset at the time was, this is a Sacramento team that is absolutely desperate to break this playoff drought. That they now, I believe, have the longest playoff drought in the NBA. They haven't made the playoffs since 2006, obviously. And so their mindset was, yeah, we had a nice season, but we can still upgrade this. We can get a new head coach. We can add some veterans to the roster. And we can continue to progress as a team and not just settle for a below 500 season being the best thing that we've done in a long, long time. Now, granted, that mindset isn't completely flawed, but for Sacramento, they've been trying to find a head coach for forever. And once they finally found one that actually did decently and established an identity and made Sacramento a relevant basketball team, they decided, we're going to go ahead and move on from the guy. Now, Walton as a hire was interesting at the time because He had just been fired from the Lakers. That was a job that he got mostly because he went 39-4 as an interim replacement for Steve Kerr for the Warriors after Kerr was recovering from back surgery. And so he gets the Lakers job. He's there with Lonzo, Brandon Ingram. Doesn't do a great job, but not necessarily a bad job. But once LeBron showed up and they got partway through that season, LeBron basically was like, yeah, this is just not going to be the guy. Like, I'm not going to play for Luke Walton. It just wasn't going to be a thing. So the Lakers fired him. And it does seem like a very Sacramento thing to do in hindsight. You have a really good season, you finally find a coach, and then you fire the guy and bring in someone else who had just been fired. But the circumstances of Luke Walton being fired in LA were a little bit murky. However, that offseason, they weren't done. They also went on a bit of a spending spree for Corey Joseph, Dwayne Dedmon, and Trevor Ariza. Basically, none of which did anything remotely substantial or significant for the franchise over the next couple of years. But they thought, well, we've got these young guys. Let's add some veterans. Let's change the coach. And then we'll be a much better team. We'll be a playoff team in the years following. Here was the big problem, though, and this is the biggest failure of Luke Walton as a head coach. He completely changed the way that Sacramento played. I've gone the entire video talking about how fun and exciting it was, how they established an identity, how they were playing at a fast pace. They had the 20th pace in the league. They had a bottom 10 pace in the league in Walton's first year as head coach. And it was immediately clear that he did not have a feel for this roster and for what they did best. There were, throughout his 2 years, there were rumors of dysfunction with the players, Buddy Hield not being a huge fan. Obviously, we know the Marvin Bagley stuff has been very dramatic. But arguably, I think, the biggest failure was this idea that he was just going to completely change the way that the team played. Now, he turned it around a little bit in the second season. They were 10th in pace, but he never was able to find that balance that Jaeger did, where they were top 5 in pace, and they were 20th in defensive rating, which isn't great, but it was good enough for them to get enough stops and play at a fast pace and get a lot of points in transition. And I've never understood why Luke Walton felt the need, once he got to Sacramento, to change so many things about what that team was doing well. Like, I can understand him wanting to say, guys, we got to guard better. We got to make sure that we're really, sticking to our principles on the defensive end. I understand that, but to slow everything down for them to not play at that fast pace made absolutely no sense to me. And that is probably, in the end, what ended up getting Luke Walton fired. Now, granted, when you go back and look at the personnel decisions, the player decisions, front office stuff throughout his tenure, yeah, there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of things that certainly could have helped him keep his job. First and foremost, they could have just drafted Luka Doncic with the second pick in the draft and not Marvin Bagley. We know that the Marvin Bagley thing has not gone well at all. And if you think about this roster, even if it wasn't as good of a situation for Luka in Sacramento as it would have been for him in Dallas, you'd still have to imagine that as great of a player as he is, he would have ended up lifting this team to probably a postseason spot at this point. And at that point, Luke Walton obviously would have kept his job. The spending spree as well that I talked about, the Dedmon, Joseph, Ariza trio that pretty much locked up any kind of long-term money they would have had, that was a huge mistake. And then the biggest one, it's not the biggest one because they missed on Luka in the draft, but apart from that, it's the decision to sign those 3 guys in free agency, then leading into not having, in their minds, enough money to bring back Bogey in free agency, letting him walk to, first they were going to trade him to Milwaukee, and then he ended up signing with Atlanta. And he's just such a good, I was going to say young player, but he's in his late 20s, but he's just such a good filler piece. Like, he can do so many different things. He's a great shot maker. He's a creator. He's someone that works well alongside De'Aaron Fox. I can't understand the mindset of letting someone like that walk, not to mention the fact that they did not convince the Lakers heavily enough, I guess, to go through with the Buddy Hield trade, where they would have gotten basically what's happening with the Wizards right now could have been happening with Sacramento, which again would have saved Luke Walton's job. And every step of the way, there's just mistake after mistake after mistake. And that's what the Kings do, right? But it's not all on Luke Walton. It's not all in the front office. It's just a comedy of errors. And that's what ultimately results in a coach that was relatively highly regarded. And people thought that him, kind of getting forced out in LA was a little bit unfair. That's kind of how you get a guy that ends up with just 2 years on the job in Sacramento. So we'll see if they can turn some things around. Ironically, the guy that's going to end up being the interim head coach is Alvin Gentry, who also comes from a Warriors pedigree. He got a job with New Orleans as a result of what he was doing with the Warriors, I guess, and they thought he was going to bring this really fun, fast-moving, up-tempo offense to New Orleans. That didn't happen. Now he's going to be the interim coach for Sacramento. So maybe he institutes, a bit more of a faster pace and things like that Walton tried to implement in his last year plus with Sacramento, but ultimately they're not going anywhere this season. It's just such a, there's just nothing to do here. Like, you can trade Buddy Hield, you can try and look at trading De'Aaron Fox, but he's on like a long-term max, and I don't know if anybody really wants him on. The Bagley thing is all over the place. They're going to be in a lottery for a little while still. So if you're a Kings fan, I feel bad for you. I'm sorry, but I kind of had to go through and look at all the mistakes of the Luke Walton era as head coach. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the box on screen, check out the links in the description as well. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Monday, and I will see you all next time.